Few things very quickly. Just we're wrapping up, obviously, what has been a very unusual year. So thank you all for your patience with this year. I imagine many of you have lots of questions. We figured rather than do any kind of presentation, we would just open it up to questions. I imagine that many of you have questions about housing in particular. Sarah and Lenora, do you want to add anything?
I can just add that our continuing students priority housing application period closed last night at midnight. And we had a large number of applications that we are sifting through that data now. And students can continue to apply for housing up until it's going to be on a rolling application basis. So up until the start of the fall quarter, and then a frosh application. So if you have any pending new students, frosh housing applications are open as of today.
Yeah, and I would just add that we're looking forward to celebrating our graduating seniors. And although our commencements will be virtual this year, which we'd rather be all in person, we do have an option for students to come and cross the stage to get their diploma and to at least come back to campus with a couple of guests, 2 guests per person. So I know many of you probably don't have graduating seniors yet, but just wanted you to know that a lot of us are gearing up for honoring all of the hard work that all of our graduating students have done to get to this point, and especially in this virtual reality that we live in. So anyone is welcome to view our commencement ceremonies. So once those are posted and online later in June, you're welcome to have a peek. So that's the other thing I just wanted to highlight this evening.
And before throwing it open to questions, which you can either put in the chat or just raise your hand and we can call on you. You probably already know this, but I can just repeat it. The campus, much of the campus will be in person. So not all classes, but most of them, not all students, but most of them. The other thing to keep in mind is that this is still a very, very fluid situation. And so we at the colleges probably have a little bit more information than you do as families, but we don't set decisions. Those decisions come from the central administration. And so there's a long sort of process. So the decisions are made and then we try to implement them as best as possible and to care for your students as best as possible. So we'll try to answer whatever questions we can, but just know that we're also working with limited information, in part because the situation remains fluid. But Sarah, maybe you can just start by saying like what the vaccine policy is going to be for the university.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mayanthi. And what we know at this moment is that, and you may have seen this also in the news, but the entire UC system, so the University of California system, as well as the California State University system, have basically determined that they are going to make it a requirement that all of our students, in addition to our faculty and staff, would have a requirement to have the vaccine. Pending FDA approval. So as you all know, the FDA has given emergency approval to the vaccines that are currently being offered, but we are going to await the full FDA approval before implementing that requirement. So we have yet to see how that will impact fall. We also know that the campus is working really hard with our county health department, as well as with the UC system to, if we are specifically, if we are going to be mandating that requirement, that we're also making vaccines accessible to students, both incoming students and students that are already affiliated with us, whether they're international students, whether they're US or California-based students. So I know that the campus is also hard at work in determining how it is that we would be able to offer a vaccination site for faculty, staff, and or students who are still needing vaccines in the fall, should that all become a mandate. So that's a little bit about what we know now, and what students have been participating in this year has been a testing program. That we were on a twice-a-week testing program if they were living on campus. We've now gone to a once-a-week testing program for those living on campus. It's also optional for any students or staff or faculty that are coming onto campus regularly or even irregularly. So that testing program has been operating all year. And at this point, where we do not know yet how, what those requirements, the testing requirements will look like going into the summer or the fall. But we have some indication that we may have some sort of testing requirement, particularly for folks who are not vaccinated. So that's what we know a little bit right now. And then I realized in our introductions, Mayanthi, we maybe didn't explain, I think we were distracted by your cat. We maybe didn't explain a little bit about our roles. So some of you, I'm seeing familiar faces. So maybe that's also partly why I didn't go into it. But both Lenora and I work on the student life side. So residential life and housing, as well as student leadership, involvement, engagement, commencement, et cetera. So everything from, I like to say, orientation to graduation that's outside of the classroom really falls under our purview, both Lenora and I. And then Mayanthi is really focused on the academic side, primarily, works with first-year students by providing the opportunity for the core course. But the provost also oversees our academic advising program, who work with your students all 4 years, ensuring that they have a successful academic experience the whole time that they're with us. I shouldn't just say 4 years, because who knows how long folks are with us. But yes, our academic advising team reports to the provost. So academic side of the house is represented by Mayanthi, and then Lenora and I can represent student life. So just thought I'd mention that too.
Thank you, Sarah. Sorry, and apologies for the distraction of my cat. He's usually not this distracting, but.
So I got a question in the chat that I wanted to address and maybe bring some information regarding what the application process for housing will look like now that the application period is closed. And so priority housing application is basically for our continuing students to express interest in a particular community here on campus. And so just because you may be affiliated with College 9, that might not, or 10, that might not mean that's where your student wants to live. After your first year, you can really live anywhere on campus. You just have to apply to that community. And so any student that has submitted their application at this point, although it is finished and you've clicked submit, you can actually still go in and make adjustments to your application. You can make adjustments to your room type preference, adjustments to your profile. So I sleep late, I wake up early, and all of those things. You can actually still apply for any of our campus-wide theme options. So our paths, such as the Rosa Parks African American Themed House, or the ILC, the International Living Center, our trans-inclusive housing, any of those specialty communities, you can still submit those supplemental applications to those. And you can do that all the way up until we assign you to a housing space. So up until that assignment is processed. And so the question that I got in the chat is, our son wanted to select a 2-person room as his #1 choice, but that selection was not available. You still have the ability to go in and edit that in your application. If there's a particular community that you're applying to, what that may mean is that room type is not available. And so coming this year, we will have very limited triples and doubles. We will have some, so there will be some triples and doubles and quads and quints, but we are limiting our apartments to no more than 6 people per apartment. And so that kind of changes the room types. And then, like I said, there's going to be very few triples and doubles as well in our residence halls. So you can go in and edit those room type preferences all the way up until we are ready to give you a housing assignment.
Thanks, Lenora. I got a couple other housing related questions while we're on that subject. And one is sort of, when will summer 2021 and fall 2021 housing decisions be made? And when might those payments be required? And when might move-in be? So sort of, if you can walk through the kind of calendar or timeline, that would be helpful. And I can also link it in the chat as well for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So summer housing applications are currently open, but we've been asked to hold off on making those assignments until next week, simply because there's some background financial issues that we have to sort through. By changing the room types, it changes the cost associated. But you can assure that any student that has applied for summer housing will have a space. We have enough space for the applicants that we've gotten so far. Fall housing, it's a little bit of a lengthier timeline. And so we will be assigning our students who are a part of that priority group who apply during this PHAP or priority housing application period at the end of June. And so your students will receive an email that will say, here's all of the information you need to know about how to pick your room. And so when I say assign, students are actually assigning themselves. We are doing something called room selection, where your student will get a lottery generated time and date where they would go in and pick their room. And then that room will be their room until they decide they don't want it anymore. And so they'll go in and they will pick their room. And then if they are not a part of a priority group, our general waitlist students, that selection or that assignment process, which will be done manually by our housing coordinator, will take place in late July. And that's just so that we can make sure that all of the groups are, like I said, those campus communities such as RPATH or ILC. We have our DRC, our Disability Resource Center students who are referred to us by the DRC, as well as our first year students who are affiliated with our colleges who have to be assigned based off of college affiliation. After that, we will be able to filter through our wait list and get as many people as possible off of that wait list and into an assignment in late July.
Thank you, Lenore. And I just linked the housing calendar, which is actually already set to next academic year. So you can see that the due date for the housing payment is September 16th. Residence is open September 18th. So there was a question about, September vacation planning and when that would be, but we are gearing up for a September 18th opening. So for folks wanting to know about that calendar is really helpful and really useful to bookmark for the whole year, actually, because it tells you when the breaks are, and tells you when you can anticipate kind of when payments are due, et cetera. So hopefully that's a helpful resource. So there were a couple other questions that I received more about classes, Mayanthi, if I can gear those towards you, just about folks are registering for their fall classes, some of which are online. And in one case I received all of which are online. If later in the year they want to attend on campus, what might housing look like? So it's sort of a both and question. And then this question keeps popping up around what classes still might be virtual versus in person. So anything you can speak to around classes and what to expect around the virtual or in-person classes, Mayanthi, and then we can address the housing piece also.
Sure. So I'm just going to put my hat on now more as faculty at Santa Cruz rather than provost, because in terms of the classes that we're going to offer at the college, those are the first year core classes, almost all of which will be in person. But unless you have a frosh coming in, that doesn't concern your students. But in terms of the regular courses that are being offered, it varies by department. It really depends on the department. I know that some faculty have been reticent about, teaching in person. Some of them have medical issues. There's a sort of, I think most of us would like to be in person. The very large lecture classes are all virtual. They're all remote. I can't remember exactly. I think now it's maybe 200 plus classes are all virtual, and classes that are fewer than 200 students can be in person. But if it's a class that's more than 200 students, it has to be remote. Just because we can't, it's sort of, a kind of a potential public health nightmare to have more than 200 students in a room together. So, and then if the whole class is remote, it would not work to have some sections that were in person and some sections that were remote. So the whole class would be remote. But again, it really does vary department by department. And so I think, departments that have more courses that are smaller you will probably find have more in-person opportunities than majors. When I say departments, I mean majors that have these big lecture courses, most of which will be remote. I don't know if that answers. If you still have a question about that, I'm happy to say more or clarify. And then the other, yeah, and so it's possible that there are students who will have an all remote curriculum for the fall. There are many students who I think who will have a mix of the two, and then there are some students who will have a full in-person curriculum in the fall. So the experience of the students is also going to be pretty different. And Sarah, do you want to say something about housing for students who would then, let's say you're all remote in the fall, you don't really need to be in person. I mean, you don't really need housing. How is that going to work for students who are coming back in the winter and or the spring?
Yeah, so if we use this year as a guide, and in years past, actually, we've often had our housing application open for housing possibilities for both winter and spring quarters. Typically, there's been less availability in those quarters, but nothing is really typical anymore. So I'm imagining that we would have some sort of open period where people could apply for housing for the winter and or the spring. But Lenora, you might know more specifically about how we might handle that.
Yeah, exactly right, Sarah. What typically happens is what the plan is moving forward. I was just replying in the chat to a parent. Unfortunately, with the pandemic still progressing the way that it is, it's impacting our number of bed spaces. And so we may have a room that is currently listed as a double, but when your student gets into that room, you'll notice 3 beds. And that's because traditionally that room is a triple. As the changes in the pandemic impact our policies, we will hopefully be able to open up more bed spaces, maybe in the fall, but like Sarah said, maybe in the winter, and be able to welcome more students on campus.
Thank you. So shifting gears a little bit, there was a question earlier on about rising sophomores. So many of your students, I know we geared a lot of our outreach to our current first year families and support folks. So many of your students likely are going on to become a sophomore or a second year student. And there's some events that are happening actually this week that are geared towards our rising sophomores, put on by our academic advisors across campus, who are really trying to help and support that community. Because of course, as this question says, our current first year students have never had an orientation or in person, haven't lived on campus. Will there be a special second year orientation event, or can second years participate in the first year orientation events? So yes, that is what we're planning right now. We've actually been meeting as staff teams to think about and be more proactive and intentional around creating an orientation or welcome week style events for our rising sophomores or our second year students, in addition to having events that are geared towards our first year students, recognizing that both first and second year students next fall haven't had the experience, most of them haven't had the experience of ever stepping foot on our campus. In addition to our transfer students, many of our transfer students have never set foot on our campus as well. So we're trying to gear orientation / welcome week events to the various populations, trying to ensure that they get the same kind of welcome and orientation that they would have received, if they had lived on campus their first year. So the goal being orienting them to campus, ensuring that they know how to get around, but also how to build community in person with one another. So I don't know if Mayanthi or Lenora, you want to address anything further there?
Well, I just want to acknowledge what a short shrift this particular class has got. I just want to acknowledge that. I know how hard it's been for them. I know how hard it's been for all of you as well to watch this sort of unfold. And so I just want to also reassure you that we are fully aware of how difficult it has been for this year's Frosh class, and the fact that many of them have never set foot on campus. They're not getting prioritized for housing, right? It is it is not an easy situation for them. And so we're really aware of that. And we're trying to sort of, I don't know what the word is, but to mitigate some of those disappointments and really disappoint, just, I do really, I mean, I'm looking at, it's really hard for them. And it's hard for us to watch this unfold as well, because we get it, we really recognize it. And so we as a team at the colleges are trying to support these rising sophomores in whatever way we can, through advising, through housing, sort of giving, telling them. So we sent an email, for instance, a couple of weeks ago, really encouraging all of those rising sophomores to apply for housing, even though it seemed like the university was not going to prioritize them. They needed to apply anyway so they could get on the wait list in case there was a chance, because there is, in fact, I think, more housing than they may realize. So we've been really trying to communicate with them as much as possible, and then creating, not just at our colleges, but at various colleges, social events where they can also meet each other with the specific intention of finding roommates, finding housemates, whether it's on campus or off campus. So there's a lot of, we are trying to, do what we can to sort of deal with this situation. There's a question here, why not give them priority? I don't understand the reasoning. So this was not our decision. I just want to make that very clear. It's a decision that was made by, I'm assuming, the chancellor and the EVC at UC Santa Cruz. I will say frankly that it would not have been my decision had I been the one making it, but it's not my decision to make. And I think it was sort of a kind of, psalmist, like, one group was not going to get prioritized. It was either going to be the incoming frosh or the rising sophomores. And I think, I don't know what the reasoning of the university was. Sarah, I don't know if you want to say something, but I if you don't mind me saying, Sarah, like, I recall a conversation that you and I were having where we talked, where I really felt pretty strongly that it should be the rising sophomores who should be prioritized, precisely because they have yet to have an on-campus experience in any kind of normal or ordinary way. And I thought that was important. That was not the reasoning of the university. And I don't know what their reasoning was. Sarah, do you?
No, I think that there was a balance of so many different factors, Mayanthi, and I think that yours and my perspective is really similar on this. And however, it wasn't our decision to make. And I think what the campus was having to weigh was all of these variety of factors, that they're also, wanting to keep, students coming to the university, want to keep, allowing for the experience of all of those students to be able to move through the opportunity to live on campus, et cetera. And I think that unfortunately, there's just not enough bed spaces based on what we know currently about the pandemic to be able to accommodate probably all of the various priorities and needs that they were trying to weigh. And yeah, I wish I had more of an explanation about why this group versus the other group, or what some of the rationale or reasoning was. And unfortunately, I don't know all of what was there. I just know that there's a lot of people that need to have housing and need to be on campus. And I know what we have control over, or what we have influence on, is to create experiences like our orientation or welcome week, to gear it towards all the various populations that we know that are affiliated with us, that we can support them in their transition regardless of where they're living, and support them with resources and support them with guidance as they either come to campus just for class, or as they're coming to campus for the first time to live. So those are the things that we have control over, and we'll do our very best to try and support all those various populations as best as possible. Yeah, I wish there was a better answer. Lenora, did you have something else to add?
Yeah, I would just share kind of what Sarah, Mayanthi, and I were talking about before we opened the room to everyone. Is we've been in housing. Sarah and I have been in housing in individual institutions, but we've been working in housing for a while. Myself 10 years, Sarah probably longer than that. And normally we'd be pretty good psychics in how these situations would go. if this were a non-pandemic year, I would say that we would work really hard to exhaust our wait lists. And we have been pretty successful in doing that in previous years, like I said, pre-pandemic. I will say that our continuing student numbers are not as far off. Our continuing student application numbers are not as far off as a normal pre-COVID pandemic year. And like I said, we've been able to work through our wait lists in that way. The factor that we just do not have answers for right now is our incoming first-year student numbers. First-year students had until May 1st to say whether they were yes or no coming to UCSC. And then they were able to receive or not receive preference, which college they wanted to be affiliated with. And then admissions goes through and assigns them those colleges. And so once those college affiliation assignments go out, we then get that number. And that then gives my team and I a better idea of how many bed spaces do we need to allocate for first-year students, how many bed spaces need to go to transfer students, and then the rest we'd be able to offer to students on that wait list. Like I said, if our continuing student number application numbers are any indication of where we were this time last year, that process should still be able to happen successfully. The wild card right now is our incoming frosh and transfer class.
And I would just add the other wild card in all of this is how a vaccine requirement will then impact the number of housing spaces we can offer. So right now, as Lenora was saying, we have been limited or limiting the numbers of people that would live in the same room and under the same large roof, so to speak, because of the factor that we don't know how many students will be vaccinated or not. But it may change if that FDA approval goes through and the vaccine is required of all UC students, all students entering, then that may look different then for housing, and we may be 100% open, and in which case our crystal balls, so to speak, that Lenora and I use in determining the numbers in our bed spaces may come to fruition. So we may have that opportunity to offer more students, and like Lenora said earlier, it may be that we're able to open more of those spaces in the winter should some of these chips fall the way that we're hoping for. We're all hoping for, right? That the pandemic gets under control and the vaccine is widely utilized so that we can have folks living under the same roof, so to speak. So that was, I know, yet another question about why not open up fully if we have a vaccine. So that would be, one potential outcome in all of this.
And I realize that there's a lot of uncertainty here, and it's a little bit kind of crazy making. I realize that because basically there's a sort of like, we don't really know what's going to happen. Apply for housing as much as you can, but we don't really know if you're going to get off the wait list. But we hope you can. But I would say two things there. One is, if don't or for your student, make sure that they are applying for whatever they can be applying for, if that's the thing that they want. Because I think, as Lenora just pointed out, I would just say sort of keep pushing as much as possible toward a normal, but then also recognizing that there's just a lot of deep uncertainty, and it's sort of crazy making for all of us because it's impossible to plan. It's impossible to plan a curriculum. It's impossible to really sort of plan. I'm in the anthropology department, and we have no idea how many of our students are going to be remote and how many of them are going to be in person. We have no idea if our events are going to be attended. We have no idea, whether we should be planning hybrid events or whether we should be in person. I run a Center for Cultural Studies. Similarly, I have no idea, how this is going to work. I'm supposed to be, it's a weekly colloquium. I need 8 speakers for the fall. I can't invite anyone because I don't know if they have to be local or whether they can be virtual. So this is all just to say we're kind of all in it together in some ways. And again, thank you for your patience because we realize that there's a lot of patience here that's being required of you, and we wish it were otherwise, but unfortunately this is really just the situation that we're in, which is why Sarah and I have been having these quarterly information sessions. I think maybe even not quite monthly, maybe quarterly, But we wanted to do, we just wanted to kind of give you whatever information we have right now, knowing that that may change in 2 weeks.
Thank you. There's a couple of other questions here I was hoping to get to, and thank you all for all your questions. It's really helpful, and hopefully we're going to get to all of them. Mayanthi, this is a little bit more geared towards you. Is the status of the class remote or in person known at the time of registration? Like, do students see that when they're enrolling? Okay.
They should, yes.
Great.
Yes.
Great. And then there's been some questions about our outdoor activities, for example, soccer, pickup games, or other things starting this summer, or if not this fall. And I'm sure Lenora and I can both piggyback on this one, but we just instituted late this spring, actually, the opportunity to do outdoor events in small groups. So up to 10 residents can have an outdoor activity. Some of our athletics and recreation areas are starting to open up. Our pool is now open. Our track is now open. So as long as folks are maintaining physical distance and wearing their mask and not in groups larger than 10, they're able to do some of these outdoor activities. We have tons of hiking trails, we have frisbee golf, all sorts of things like that are open, and folks are able to do that. So yes, pickup games or soccer games and things like that. The unfortunate part is that the basketball hoops and the nets have all been taken down. There's, I know that some tennis courts are open though now. So we're hoping to see through this summer that, the basketball nets get put back up, and that some of these other courts and opportunities for students to play in some larger groups might start to open up in the summer. We don't know yet what the June 15th, California will be changing some of its requirements on June 15th. We don't yet know what those requirements will look like for higher education and for the UC system. We're imagining that, some things will be able to open up. And so we're proposing that as early as this summer, we might be able to have larger outdoor events or gatherings. We're proposing that students would be able to quarantine or gather up in larger numbers. So that's our hope and goal, is that starting this summer, we'd be able to open things up a little bit more in anticipation that fall could be even more open, depending on, again, all these various factors we keep talking about. Lenora, is there anything else you'd add there for outdoor events?
No, I think you've been nailing the head. We are also working very closely with our campus recreation, and they're doing a lot of both indoor and outdoor activities. And so even if it's not something that might be sponsored by colleges 9 and 10, our staff are working diligently to either gather the information or co-sponsor and support those kinds of outdoor opportunities.
And if I could just add, there is there are, I know that there's a basketball court, for instance, if your student is already on campus, there's a basketball court. Is it on Meter Street, Sarah? There are basketball courts that are not at the university where the nets have been taken down, but in other places around Santa Cruz. If your student wants to shoot some hoops, there are possibilities for that. And we can even put I know one of them is on Meter. There's a kind of park with a basketball court that's there.
Yes, you've got it, Meter Street Park. And there are a number of other parks, and even all of the playgrounds have reopened. Not that students love to be at playgrounds, but often where there's a playground, there are basketball hoops usually nearby, at least in Santa Cruz, I've noticed that. So I know that in the county of Santa Cruz and in the city of Santa Cruz, like beaches are open, there's no restrictions on beaches right now and things like that. So students can definitely get off campus and take part in a variety of different activities off campus for sure. There was a question about study abroad next year, and that is a good question. It's also a question on many of our minds as well, in terms of what will study abroad look like. Again, it depends on the various countries. It also depends on the education abroad program that is run through the University of California. A lot of that is determined, again, centrally. We are hoping and anticipating some of our UCSC exchanges. So we have some exchanges set up with other universities, partner universities, that that are kind of smaller exchanges, so smaller numbers of students. And depending on the restrictions of that country, we might be able to do that exchange, meaning we may be able to have some exchange students from abroad coming to the United States, and in turn, we may be able to send some of our students. So I know that our international engagement unit has been working diligently, as well as our study abroad unit has been working diligently to figure out what are all of the various parameters and what's safe versus not safe too. I think what we're seeing right now in California is we're, you know, and especially in our county right now, we're in the yellow tier. So things are looking more positive, but that's not the case for many places around the globe. So study abroad has to not only abide by the University of California guidelines, but also looking at some of the health parameters or health mitigating factors of those countries that students might be going to. So that was another question. Hopefully that answers that. Sorry, I'm trying to go through all the various questions that were asked. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say there was a question here, and I think there were some folks who came in late. So I just also want to reiterate something that we had said earlier, which is that we are going to have activities for rising sophomores that are distinct from orientation for incoming frosh. So just to be very clear about that, we are intentionally going, we recognize that many of the rising sophomores need their own orientation and their own welcome week because they didn't get that this year. And so this is something that, you know, we'll plan for the fall. But we will have special activities for rising sophomores precisely because they didn't get the kind of experience. So we're so in a way we're not going to just, you know, leave them aside, but we're also not going to fold them into frosh orientation. They're going to be two distinct processes.
There is a question following up to our activities or outdoor activities conversation about, where would we ask for the latest and current regulations for on campus is different than off campus. So I can put in the chat a link to our on campus recreation and athletics page that has kind of what's open, what's not open, and what students need to abide by if they're doing outdoor activities. But off campus is really different. So that would be the County of Santa Cruz. And I think I might have a quick link I can add to the chat as well. There was a question going back to some of the housing pieces, Lenora, about a couple of different questions, but we'll start with one. Do summer students living in a dorm or in a residence hall have priority for residence halls in the fall? Do you want to start with that one and I can add more?
Yeah, absolutely. So the priority groups that were shared, I can share it in the chat, only include a small number of students who indicated to be summer residents as well as fall residents. I believe that number was around 100. And at this time, that number has been met. Another group that is, if they are current students who had extenuating circumstances that required them to live on campus, then those extenuating circumstances would qualify them to be in a priority group for the fall as well. So I hope that answered the question. Just because you apply and stay for summer does not necessarily mean that you will be guaranteed for the fall. While we're talking about students who may or may not be able to stay on campus, there are a couple of off-campus opportunities for students to look into, very similar to the way that you can set up your profile and get a roommate for on campus. Community Rentals utilizes a software called Places for Students, where students can go in, and here I'll put the link for Community Rentals in the chat, where students can go in and make their own profile and meet others who are either looking for a roommate or are looking for housing in the Santa Cruz area. And then there are renters in Santa Cruz who post specifically to our community rentals page and are sanctioned by our housing department, our campus housing department, or our community off-campus rentals department. And so that might be a really good place to go have your student go in, make a profile and see if there are others who are looking for a roommate, and maybe share some like qualities that you would like to group up and live together off campus.
Thanks, Lenora. The other question you've somewhat alluded to in the past in terms of folks can be making changes to their application, but this question is, if a current first year put triple room as their first choice for housing, should they change it since there'll be limited triples? And then late in July is late to find out in terms of off-campus housing options. So there's a number of questions related to the timing and then off-campus resources, which I know you just alluded to with community rentals as well.
Yeah, so I'll touch on the triple one first. There should be an option, and I'm like pulling from like the corners of my mind. There should be a way for you to preference 3 to 5 room types, and any of those preferences will be taken into consideration when pulling students from the wait list. And so what will happen there is we will go to the wait list based off of the room spaces that we have available. And if we pull that application and that application says, I would like a res hall triple, a res hall single, or a apartment single, and we have an apartment single, although that was the third preference, we're going to go ahead and assign them to that room because it was a preference that was indicated. And then they will receive an email immediately that says, you've been assigned to a space. And you can go into the housing portal and see what that space is. In between the application period and when that assignment actually happens, a student can go in and cancel their housing application with no penalty. And so if you are determining that you want to look for some off-campus solutions and you do find a lease and you'd rather go in that direction, you can cancel your on-campus housing application at no penalty, as long as there has not been a housing assignment provided to you. Now, the reverse of that is, let's say that you are looking for an off-campus possibility and you get an assignment, but you decide that off-campus will work better. There's a timeline for what that cancellation fee will be once you receive that assignment. I believe up until August, it's a $150 cancellation fee, and that cancellation fee continues to go up the closer and closer we get to move-in day. But yeah, like I said, if you are not afforded an assignment and you find something off campus and you cancel your housing application, there's no penalty to do that.
Thanks, Lenora. There was a question which I know we alluded to before, but more specifically for rising junior transfers. Will there be activities for rising junior transfers? So I know we addressed it earlier that we're trying to do various populations. We know we want to target events to various populations of students coming back in the fall and doing various both virtual and in-person kind of welcome week activities all throughout the fall quarter to target all those different populations that we've mentioned. So rising sophomores being one, our first year students, second year transfer students. But we also I just wanted to mention STARS, which is our services for transfer and reentry students. They're an excellent resource center on campus, and they have been doing a variety of virtual programs to support our transfer students. So if your transfer student isn't already connected with them, I encourage you to get connected to STARS, and we can drop the link in the chat as well for that. But they, for sure, there's been outreach not only from STARS, but I know from our advising team for the various populations to ensure that they have access to and know about the various resources. So I'll drop that link as well. And then I've just found some of the recreation links that I alluded to earlier, so I can put those in the chat as well. I did put in the chat just to verbally name that we are recording this session, so we'll put it on our website. I put the direct links. It'll be on our family page to be able to access later. So I put those on there. And thanks, Manthi, for reposting that. I'm trying to see if there's other questions. there was some questions about, there was a question about whether or not we'd be doing tours over the summer so that students can have the opportunity to see the campus. And again, we can link the admissions page. I better write down all these pages that I'm going to add, but we can link the admissions page because that's where I would recommend that your student goes. But then just today, Lenora, didn't Gabi share that there's a really cool new virtual tour that just went live today, I think. Do you want to share about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Admissions just released a pretty interactive 360 tour that you can watch virtually. And give me a second to find the link and I can add it to the chat.
And if you asked a question earlier and we haven't yet got to it, just ask it again because it's just sort of got lost in the long chat.
Yeah, and then there was another question that came in around rising second-year student participating in fall orientation activities, even if she's taking remote classes and will be living elsewhere in the fall. So basically about students who are going to be still remote in the fall and how can they participate in some of our fall orientation activities if they don't, if the student doesn't get a housing spot, and would it be possible to even make arrangements for them to be in Santa Cruz during that orientation week? So that was one question. And I can start to address it and then turn it over to my Anthea or Lenora if you have other things to add. But certainly we're looking at, right now at least, we've been told that our fall orientation activities need to be primarily virtual. So even as we target some of these populations, like I was saying, a lot of that would still, in terms of the content and the resources and all of that, we would likely need to still be doing a lot of that virtually so they wouldn't miss out. Or we're hoping that folks would be able to engage online, and particularly any large scale events, things that we want our entire class of second years to go to, or our entire class of first years to go to. Those kinds of events we would still be doing virtually, so students would, no matter where they are, be able to log in and join. And then a lot of the, what we're talking about in terms of on-campus orienting, those would be geared more towards the on-campus population to ensure that they know and understand how they can be oriented to campus. Those would be geared towards the folks that are living on campus. So we're hoping to create space for both, right? That there would be virtual ways to engage as well as in-person ways to engage. And then in terms of arrangements to be in Santa Cruz during orientation week, the one thing I would just name at this point is that orientation week may look more like orientation month or orientation quarter. We don't yet know if, depending on the vaccine requirement, et cetera, if folks will have to sequester or will need to, take some time to quarantine themselves, so to speak, while we are, initiating vaccines, et cetera. So it may be that we're looking at orientation kinds of events spanning a larger period of time. So it would be hard to say, oh, they should come this week to be in Santa Cruz so that they can get the orientation materials. A lot of that, like I said, will be mostly virtual. But Lenora and Mayanthi, do you have more to add to that?
Only that the reason for that is because we're talking so many numbers, right? So the same reason that any class over 200 has to be remote, similar for something like orientation, where each college has 400 to 500 frosh. And so we can't do in-person events for them in the same way that we would if there weren't a pandemic.
We are having conversations to think a little creatively about how can we outreach to students on an individual basis, recognizing that this year has been so tumultuous. And so I would just encourage students, I know emails can sometimes get bombarded, but that's the best way that we have currently to reach out to our students, between emails and phone numbers. And so my staff explicitly will be doing outreach over the summer, just to first extend a, hey, I'm your person. And then as we go into the fall, trying to coordinate with those cohorts of, here's where I'll be, or here's how we're going to connect, or you can meet me at this space. But unfortunately, if they miss that email or if they miss that text message and decide not to opt in, it's same thing like, what we're experiencing with emails every single day, it might get buried. And so I would just really, really encourage students to stay on top of their UCSC emails. And when they see something from, you know, hey, I'm your RA, or hey, I'm your college guide, knowing that, oh, that's my person. Like, this will be my person that helps me navigate through this second year, or whatever year your student may be at, transfer, first year, etc.
Yeah, there've been some a few more dates questions. Sorry, Mayanthi. Just a few more things. I just linked again the calendar. So for folks asking about move-in, again, students, what we know right now is that we will be opening on September 18th. So there'll be assigned a move-in day sometime the 18th, 19th, 20th, so to speak. That's what we're anticipating at this moment. And then welcome week and orientation activities usually start simultaneously with move-in. So it will take us up until when classes start, which I believe instruction begins, it says on the calendar, September 23rd, which is a Thursday, I believe. So that calendar is really helpful, helpful link.
There's an interesting question here that I don't know the answer to, but I think it's a housing question. My son only did 1 quarter of school in the fall last year and is taking gap quarters until fall when he can be on campus. How does this, is he a frosh or a continuing student, and how does that impact his housing priority?
If he did a quarter in the past, he would be considered a continuing student for housing. And so I know credit-wise, he's not necessarily a continuing student, but when you are first admitted, that cohort or that classification is what dictates what your application period or what your application status is. And so if you've already been admitted prior to fall, what fall are we? Fall 2021. If you were admitted prior to fall 2021, then you were in a previous cohort. Your new cohort is now considered a continuing student for your housing application.
Thanks, Lenora.
There was a question about libraries and will libraries be open? And I'm excited to say that actually our science and engineering library just recently opened for student study only. McHenry is still, our main library is still closed. But Mayanthi, do you know anything about fall?
I don't, but I actually thought McHenry was reopening soon. Am I misspeaking? Is it just science and engineering? I thought I got an email about McHenry. McHenry, for those of you who don't know, is the main, is sort of the main library. I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, according to the website, McHenry is still currently closed, but you could be right that maybe they're gearing up for opening soon. But yes, science and engineering is open for student study as of now, which is great. But according to their website, at least it says it's still closed.
Okay, and just a quick reasoning here. One of the reason McHenry has been closed is that the university has some, I don't know what exactly it is, but it's some contract with whoever does the digital output of all of its catalog, essentially, like all its collection, that will not, we have access, students and faculty have access to that in kind of digital form during the pandemic, and for whatever reason, whatever company that is won't allow the library to open and give digital access at the same time in the same capacious way. So that is why McHenry has remained closed, which is, believe me, the faculty are not happy about that. So we are as unhappy as your students are about the fact that McHenry has remained closed for this long.
There was a question about, is there a way to indicate if a student is fully vaccinated in the housing application? Lenora, do you know that answer?
Not at this time, and it probably won't be in the housing application because of HIPAA. We are not able to collect that data. The health center is working diligently on their own student health portal. It's called eHealth. Is it Health eMessenger? I had the title mixed up. It's called Health eMessenger, and that is where you would go in and submit all of your vaccinations and immunizations information. For instance, this year, everyone was required to submit whether they got the flu shot or not, and that lives in Health eMessenger with our student health center staff.
there any other questions? We're sort of coming to the tail end of.
I got a question about roommate matching, and I just want to clarify. I think I mentioned earlier that students have the option to go in and change their preferences and profile as well as their roommates. I don't know if I said this, so I just want to like name it for the group that the roommate portion is turned off right now. Right now, it was just we're trying to get people's applications in, and it will be turned on this week for people to go in and continue to make those edits. There is a specific page. Let's say you have a person that you know you'd like to live with. You can go in and request them, either putting in their username or their student ID number or their name, and then they would go in and confirm. And that is when you two will be matched. And when it's time for you to pick your room, you have the option to bring that person in with you on whoever has the highest lottery number. And so let's say I'm number 1 and Sarah's number 10, but I would go in and pick Sarah and my room, and we will go in and pick that room together. But that's not turned on yet. That will be turned on later this week, and students will receive detailed instructions on how to do that through their UCSC email.
I just wanted to say also, sorry, I keep sort of jumping in here. I just got an email, which I wanted to put in or the link in the chat. The other thing I just want to recognize for those students who have to live off campus is that it's kind of a horrific housing market, and I fully understand that. And the university is also, I think, understanding that. And so one of the things it's offering is now free legal services for students who are, need to have are having lease problems or landlord problems or something like that. So I'm just going to put in the chat, if you do have a student who's planning to live off campus, there are these resources for them, should they need them.
Thanks, Mayanthi. And there were definitely some more questions about dates, and if students don't move in on the 18th, if there are penalties or if there's anything related to those dates. So I know, Lenora, you somewhat spoke to this, so I'll take a quick stab at it and then you can go for it. But I know that we need to try to move in all of our students in a short period of time in order to have time for some orientation related activities, both in person and virtual, for those living on campus, and then be able to have time for students to start their classes on the 23rd of September. And so the hope and goal is that once a student is assigned a space, they will also receive a move-in date and time and or a request to give us the time that they want to move in based on the dates that are set forth for our colleges. And then if there's a need to adjust that, then they're able to do that. But I know that usually in terms of the timing, the date may not be as movable or flexible, but the time is, right? Lenora, do you want to share anything more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the thing that we ask, and it's in the contract, so we're flexible. The contract is not, and so I'm speaking on behalf of my office right now. The thing that we ask is that if you are not able to move in on your designated move-in day, is that you let us know. Send us an email or call our office. We will make a note on your account. Because the contract states that if you do not move in within 24 hours of your move-in date, then you are relinquishing that contract. And so before that happens, we will call you with whatever number we have on file to be like, hey, just wanted to make sure, are you coming? Because we want to move through that wait list. And so if we have students who are in need of housing and someone changes their mind, we really want you to communicate with us so that we can accommodate the rest of our students as quickly as possible. So if you're not able to come on the 18th, if you're definitely coming later, give us a call, send us an email, and we will hold your spot until we have to do otherwise.
Should we? It's 7 Pacific at least, or 7:02. So we should probably wrap up. There's lots of folks who've stayed with us. So, and if you do have further questions, you can also just feel free to reach out to us via email. And we will, again, we realize it's limited information and a lot of uncertainty. So again, just thank you for your patience, and thank you for thank your students as well. It's been, an extraordinary year that I don't think anyone's ever going to forget. So we are doing what we can, and we realize you are too, and your students are too. So thank you for bearing with all of this. And yeah, let me put my email in the chat as well. And yeah.
And then if you
thank you all.
The 9 and 10 housing office, you can. We're probably all up and through your emails, but you can email the 9 and 10 housing office, and that will not. Thank you, Sarah. 9 housing 10, and that will get to me as well.
And
thanks, everyone. I'm sorry.
Trying to think about. It's okay. I just wanted to name that I'm scrolling through, and I think we got to all the questions, but if I find a question we didn't get to, we'll be sure to post that, as well as post all of these various resources along with the video on our family's websites that I alluded to earlier. So College 9 or College 10, if you just go to College 9 or College 10, you'll see one of the top tabs, navigation tabs, is to the right. It says families. That's where this information will be posted. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thanks, everyone, for your questions. Good night, good morning for those of you who are on the other side of the world. Bye.